Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for May 22nd, 2017. We'll begin with a special order calendar. Item number 1, continued hearings, 1289 80BZ, 298 West 231st Street in the Bronx.
Okay, we have Department of Investigation, and Fire Department was fine about this at the last hearing. As requested, the applicant went through the conditions of the prior approvals, states that the hours are unchanged, that they do state a video monitoring system is in place, as are security lock boxes and so on, but they didn't, as far as I could tell, didn't provide anything to support that. That's just a statement. They don't maintain, as was required by the previous grant, a security guard at the parking lot. They say that they have video surveillance, so we should understand more about what that is and how effective it is, because the applicant has asked for the condition of a guard to be removed. They did pay off the open boiler violations, which were the responsibility of the tenant, and the ceiling violation was cured. Any other comments on this? Okay.
Item number 2, 6594BZ, 14402 Jewel Avenue, Queens.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 3, 20197BZ, 11902 Rockaway Boulevard, Queens.
Okay. They provided photos and a helpful, if dizzying, video of the site. The only possibly outstanding issue that I saw was that concrete block trash enclosure. They said that something was supposed to have been repaired, but I can't tell what it is since many, many submissions ago. Like, we've had photographs of it and it keeps looking the same. And I think it still looks pretty terrible. We had said that it was to be stuccoed, painted, and painted, and they didn't. They're just leaving it the exposed, kind of almost burned-looking concrete block. But they did have a list of other things that have been repaired, and they showed photos. Anybody comment? Okay.
Item number 4, 3000BZ, 465, 469 West 165th Street, and 458, 464 West 166th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, they have new counsel on this, and counsel responded to some of our issues by resubmitting old materials. Not really sure why, because I found that kind of difficult to wade through. They did address, though, that the attendance booth is to be heated, which we saw already at the last submission. Some dimensions on the drawings were added, but the issue actually was, back then, will the parking spaces fit within the property lines based on the survey? And has the lot been reposted and refenced to remain on its own property? We really didn't get anything on that. And the dimensions, they said the string dimensions were provided, but a string's supposed to go all the way from one end to the other, and there's a total. And there's no comparison to the survey. It really should be that the proposed plan is superimposed on top of the survey, so that you know that all the parking spaces are fitting on your lot. They also identified, as in the prior submission, that the lighting needs to be shielded from the adjoining property. That should have been done. And the photos are old photos, so I didn't see an update on that. And there were still some open questions. We asked for more photographs of the interior of the site, so to understand all the perimeters and their conditions. We asked whether any physical improvements were done since we met last. We asked that all the parking spaces and drive widths be dimensioned and show the reservoir area on the principal plan. And they did talk about a concrete block wall that, which we identified as being in need of support. They said it belongs to somebody else, but I'm not really sure how they know that, because I don't know whether they've staked out their property lines. Anybody else?
I think the survey indicates that, though.
That it's off the property?
That's not part of the property.
Okay.
But maybe that can be clearly stated in the documents.
Okay.
I just wanted them to clarify that when they say they're going to put up new fencing, that it's going to be all the way around the site, because they had it was not uniform. There were
Right.
parts where it looked like the adjacent neighbors had put up plywood sheets and,
The plans, the proposed plans still show that there's corrugated fencing that's still on for one portion of the site remaining, so.
Okay. I mean, I understand there's new council, but we did go into this at length. That could have been addressed from the videos.
So it no longer Fried Frank,
The
the new firm?
new council, I think it's,
Still Fried Frank?
I think it's Rosenberg.
And Estes.
And Estes, yes.
Oh, okay, so change it on the lineup.
Okay. Just making a note. I guess that has to be changed on the heading?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Estes, yeah.
I'll look for tomorrow's one.
Okay. All right.
New cases, item number 5, 58156BZ, 2401 to 2411 36th Avenue, Queens.
Okay. The community board recommended approval, though the statement of facts was a bit circuitous in the storytelling wise. My questions eventually were mostly answered as I read along. But just to clarify, I'd like to understand a little bit better where the training actually take place in that large room. Are they actually doing hands-on work with the insulation material, or is it just kind of videos and then you learn in the field because they're interns or apprentices? And I'm also wondering why you need a loading dock for this use. Anybody else? Go
I
ahead.
think we all have
go
questions.
ahead.
So there are a few things that I want the applicant to kind of look into it in the statement of fact. I think there are a couple of inconsistent numbers with the number of employees and users, so that needs to be consistent. I had some questions. I noticed there were barbed wire fencing along 36th Avenue and along the site lot line. I think given the use that is changing, I mean, even before that, there shouldn't have been, but they should be removed.
Yeah.
There were lights that were mounted on the street frontage. I want to know if they are going to be retained, and if they are, they need to be indicated in the drawings and need to ensure that the lights will be casting downwards away from the residences.
So they have to provide a light spread
Yes.
diagram.
There is fencing around the site which needs fixing. I'm assuming as part of this comprehensive work that would be done. I did have some question about, since there will be evening classes and this being a residential area, most of the on-street parking by then would be fully occupied. I just want to make sure that the on-site parking that is there on the site will be adequate to handle the number of
It's only 12
visitors.
spaces, right?
But just need to understand whether there is enough on-street parking available for the evening classes that are going to be held, which is,
So that means they're going to have to do a parking study in order to establish that. But the thing is, in terms of zoning, they're not required to provide parking for this, right? Because this was a this was a non-conforming use way back in the day, right? Then it got a variance.
Okay.
And so as a non-conforming use, didn't have to have parking. And then when it got a variance, didn't have to have parking. So you can't really impose, and they provided 12 spaces that they didn't need to provide. So you really can impose it on them from a zoning perspective, right? So unless we see that it's it'd be different if it was a banquet facility, then we know that it's like,
Right.
But this sounds like only 40, how many say, 40 students in a class? So maybe what we need to hear more of is their proximity to transportation
Yeah.
and so on.
right, that could just answer that
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
They also said that there were 65 visitors per day, but I believe that included the daytime and the evening, so I would think that the office closes by the time the classes start, so it would be better
Yeah.
if they could split that up a bit. How much are daytime visitors and what are evening visitors who drive and will be looking for parking.
So this kind of the spread of activities. Okay. Commissioner Otley-Brown?
I was just curious as to what was going on in the classes. Is it introducing loud machinery into the building that might not have been there, that might pose a noise hazard?
I agree that I found some inconsistencies too. Also, with this floor area on page 2 of the statement was incorrect. And then the proposed plans show a warehouse where it really should be a training area in this section. I agree, the fencing is all pretty old and rusty, and I don't believe it has proper screening to the residential, and there is literally barbed wire everywhere, including on the neighbor's garage adjacent to the site, which I think is pretty obnoxious. Right now, they have like 4 steel containers in the parking lot and like 4 dumpsters, and I'm just wondering, is that the new people moving in or the old people moving out, or why are they
Yeah.
there?
I think
And,
that's what, in the statement, they said that those would be removed. That's for work.
And they have some rolled-down doors with facing the street, which have graffiti. They still have a roll-down door by the rear loading dock, which I don't know if that will remain or why it's necessary. And I think that's it. Oh, even the fenced entrance to the cellar has a fence, and that's full
Has
of
barbed
razor
wire.
wire too. It's like,
But that, I believe, according to the plan, it's going to change. It's going to become more of a greenhouse
Yes.
entrance to the
Right.
cellar. So that will definitely,
and I guess that doesn't count as floor area. But it's like
No,
a covered
no. because that's
entryway
an
with a
emergency
wall.
exit. That's,
No, that's the entrance to the cellar, I thought.
that's an odd way to enter. Isn't there another staircase within the building? I think there is a staircase.
There is a staircase
Oh,
in
maybe,
the
okay,
building.
so maybe they could explain that.
We'll look again at the drawings. Okay. All right.
Item number 6, 5896BZ, 277 Park Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, we need the community board recommendation and fire department. I just want council to note there's a correction in the total floor area since the 96 grant and the 2007 grant amendment to it, which includes the lobby at the basement level, which wasn't part of the original grant, so that needs to be amended. And I believe we should update the massage licenses. Anybody else?
I had just a couple of comments on the signage based on site visit. There were additional signage that I noticed along Lexington Avenue. There were 3 windows on the second floor, and those should be included into the analysis in the plans and for the sign. And also along the 48th Street frontage, there were 3 full-length window panels that had kind of, I would say, they were not the logo, it was more of advertisement kind of panels, so those also should be looked into and ensure that they are permitted, and if they are, they should be included in the zoning regulation, into the signage analysis, and should be consistent with the regulations.
Okay. Anybody else?
Oh, I think the notes on the plan still say the fire alarm system will be installed.
Right.
So maybe they could make sure that, they would give us proof that it's installed.
Right. Okay.
Item number 7, 704BZ, 2208 Bowler Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, I didn't have any issues with this because the letter of substantial compliance was issued very recently, and this application is only to extend the term to complete. I don't don't know if anybody else did.
I was just curious if they have the financing in place to complete the project, because they said they do have financing and can move forward. So is it a complete package?
And I would like to know what the start date of construction is, what is the anticipated start date? That's not been stated in the document. And also I wasn't quite clear about the current status with regards to the DOB permit, so if that could be clarified.
Anything else? No? Okay.
Ready?
Okay.
Item number 8, 11707BZ, 222 East 34th Street, Manhattan.
The community board recommends approval. I want to again note to council, because this is an extension of term, there's a reduction in the floor area at the first floor and a change in the operating hours. So just to make sure you pick those up. And again, they should provide the massage licenses because they're adding a massage room, and we need fire department.
Again, on this one, I noticed additional signage. There are 4 signage posted on the second floor and not as indicated in the plan or in the analysis, so those should be factored in.
Did they provide any pictures of the fire alarm?
No. Yeah, well, it's always the fire department's call on, right, show that the fire alarm
was
system,
operational,
and if there are
right.
sprinklers, which there has to be, and this is a large space, I assume there is, that it's operational.
Sometimes they provide us a proof of the inspection.
Right. Alarm. Okay.
Move on. Appeals calendar, continued hearing items. Item number 9, 2016-4329A, 2001 Bartow Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, so given the nature of this case, I'm actually going to read a pretty long summary, and everybody else is welcome to do the same, but it is long, so I warn you. So this is a relook at a revised design for the 9,164 square foot Bartow Avenue LED illuminated back-to-back sign that the board rejected in 2016. In respect to DOB had asked in its earlier submission for clarification that the instant appeal is on its denial of a ZRD1 determination request, that the proposed 54 LED panels are 54 individual signs rather than one sign, rather than related to the existing permit for the monopole structure. I agree with DOB that the question before us is whether the proposed configuration or assembly constitutes one sign or many, and not whether the monopole permit was properly issued. It isn't clear from the papers whether DOB continues to believe that the monopole permit is valid. The instant appeal focuses on language in the BSA resolution that considered the first version of the sign assembly that the board determined constituted a single 9,164 square foot advertising sign. Section 32-622 prohibits the surface area of signs located beyond 200 feet from the arterial highway from exceeding the equivalent distance in linear feet, or in this case, approximately 322 square feet. That, the BSA resolution that we issued in 2016 concluded several different things. One, that a single supporting pole supports a, quote, gridded structural framework made up of vertical and horizontal supports, uprights, and cross arms, unquote, all of which the board described as the, quote, monopole structure. A permit for that monopole structure was approved by DOB on May 13, 14. 2, that the subject assembly is not contextual or appropriate at the subject site, and is a clear hazard and distraction to motorists on the New England Thruway, and by virtue of its size, degree of illumination, and close proximity to dense residential development, is a potentially significant nuisance, and that the board's decision furthers the intent of the arterial highway restrictions on signs. 3, these are the board resolution determinations, that, quote, where multiple advertising displays are affixed to a single structure, those displays constitute a single sign, unquote. And, quote, notwithstanding the fact that the advertising panels are separated from each other by 12-inch spaces. 4, that the surface area must be calculated to the outermost boundaries of the common structure to which they are affixed, which constitutes the extreme limit of the representation. 5, that to interpret the section in the zoning resolution as proposed by the appellant, a sign of 30,000 square feet could also be installed at the site, clearly an absurd result not contemplated by the zoning resolution. 6, that the zoning resolution definition of sign gives no guidance as to whether the disparate elements on a single structure or grid constitute a single sign or multiple signs. 7, that the text of the zoning resolution supports the board's determination that the structural frame demarcates the extreme limits of the representation contained thereon. And 8, that the size of the gaps between the panels is not dispositive as to whether there are more than one sign, because that standard is too subjective and not suggested in the text. The appellant relies on the board's consideration of the structural grid as designed in the, what we call the Bartow number 1 case, and attempts to distinguish that structural grid from the proposed array where many horizontal members spring off of the same central supporting pole. The appellant refers to the sign at 352 West 13th Street, which the board had used to distinguish the mounting method that runs to the central supporting pole from the entire structural grid. However, in retrospect, and I rely on one of my favorite cases, Cowan v. Kern, which is a Court of Appeals case, the board is not bound to perpetuate earlier error, and in retrospect, given the image provided by the appellant of that 352 West 13th Street sign, that image shows clearly how 2 panels mounted on the same supporting pole can be read as a single representation or writing, hence a single sign. I think, therefore, the board was in error in creating a distinction between the 2 types of structural systems, and that the entirety of the structural support should delimit how the extreme limits of the representation should be viewed without including in the measurements of surface area the actual structural members themselves. This viewpoint is supported and is in fact controlled by the March 13, 2017 decision by the New York State Supreme Court in Baychester Retail versus BSA, which upheld the board's decision last year on this very same case, or on the Bartow 1 case. In that decision, the court made several holdings. 1, that the language in the text is ambiguous and unclear. Hence, the court should defer interpretation of the statute to the agency charged with administering the statute, unless such interpretation is irrational or unsupported by substantial evidence. The court held that a reading of the text indicates that in order to calculate the surface area of the sign, one must consider that part of the entire structure which constitutes the sign and distinguish such sign from that which constitutes as a distinct element the support of the signage. That, and the court goes on, that it is clear from the record that the 27 signs are mounted and displayed back-to-back and parallel, this is from the court, on a single freestanding structural frame, and therefore must be calculated as a whole and not individually. That the BSA did not make the support structure the very basis of its measurement of the surface area of the signs, that consistent with the language of the statute, consideration of the monopole structure simply served as the basis to distinguish between the point at which the sign began its measurements were excluded from measuring the surface area of the sign. The court goes on that the board concluded DOB has been inconsistent in its analysis of surface area calculations and in determining whether separate sign panels mounted to a single structure are multiple or single signs. Hence, the board did not act contrary to precedent or substitute its own public policy concerns. And that, notwithstanding the fact that the advertising panels are separated by a space of 12 inches, their surface area must be calculated in the aggregate, and the outermost boundaries of the common structure to which they are affixed constitutes the extreme limits of the representation. And finally, and most importantly for our purposes here, the court said the BSA's interpretation is buttressed by the fact that there is a single pole that supports the 54 purported individual panels for which the 54 applications were filed. That this one pole supports all 54 panels undercuts petitioners' arguments that the 54 panels should be considered separate signs whose surface areas should be independently calculated. Thus, it cannot be said that the BSA ignored the plain language of the zoning resolution or failed to address the issue before it. In response to our comments at the last hearing, that's the end of the court. I have another quote, but I'll leave that one out. In response to our comments at the last hearing, both the appellant and DOB obtained responses from the New York State Thruway Authority. Then this is in response to our stating that the Thruway Authority has actual jurisdiction over this unusual section of the roadways that's still in New York City. The authority did send each of those, both appellant and DOB, separate responses stating that they do not believe it has jurisdiction over the signs in New York City. However, I seriously doubt that either party presented the authority with a full description of the facts in this case, hence received a very general answer, which included, in its response, though, the authority provided a copy of the 1968 agreement between the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, working by and through the Federal Highway Administrator, and the New York State DOT. That agreement clarifies the state's obligations to meet certain minimum expectations by the federal government under the Federal Highway Act, and specifically under Title 23, Section 131, wherein Congress declared, among other things, that outdoor advertising along interstates and federally aided primary systems shall be controlled to promote safety and beauty and some other things, but in this case, this issue is safety. The agreement refers to Section 131D of the Highway Act, which authorizes the Secretary of Transportation to enter into agreements with the states to determine the size, lighting, spacing of signs, displays, and devices which may be erected within 660 feet of the nearest edge of the right-of-way adjacent to the interstates that are in industrial and commercial areas. Failure to act on these agreements subjects the state to cutbacks in federal funding. The agreement between New York State and the Secretary includes a provision for areas where the state has not certified to the Secretary that local zoning controls limit the signs that are in place. It sets forth the minimum standards to fulfill the intentions of the act, that a maximum area per sign of 1,200 square feet and 30 by 60 dimensions, including border and trim and excluding supporting structure, that's the maximum. That the area of that sign shall be measured by the smallest square, rectangle, triangle, circle, or combination thereof, which will encompass the entire sign. And by that, after searching some diagrams, it's because at that time period, lots of signs had these little flying emblems that kind of hung off the edge of the sign. So like Exxon would have a little Exxon logo. So it had to include that logo that's flying off the base of the sign. that the structure on which the sign is located may contain one or two signs per facing, placed double-faced, back-to-back, or V-type, one or two signs per facing. And for signs exceeding 325 square feet, they may not be double-faced, which in this case is defined as abutting and facing in the same direction. So their idea of double-faced means side-by-side. So for a sign that's bigger than 325 feet, you cannot actually have them be side-by-side. And anyway, it's one or two signs per facing. A speech which we uncovered given by the Federal Highway Administrator in July 1966, which was 2 years before this agreement was executed, concerns the Senate hearings on the Highway Beautification Act, and concluded, based on sign industry input, that that poster panels of approximately 300 square feet are customarily mounted side by side. However, painted bulletins, which are larger signs, are not mounted side by side, nor do we think they should be. Therefore, our proposed criteria for signs would only allow signs of 350 square feet or less to be mounted side by side or one over the other and facing the same direction. So that's the federal administrator giving general guidelines to the signage industry around the country. That was actually them speaking, and the 350 square feet was ultimately reduced to 325 square feet in this agreement. The agreement between the New York State and the Federal Highway Administrator ends by stating that the provisions contained herein shall constitute the standards for effective control of signs, and states that states may exercise a greater degree of control than that required by the Act, but obviously not a lesser degree of control. On June 19, 1968, the New York State Commissioner of Transportation certified that he had reviewed New York City zoning laws with respect to outdoor advertising signage near federal highways and found that they met the minimum standards. At the time, neither M, C65, C67, or C7 districts had limitations on the size of signs by establishment, but were prohibited within 200 feet of the arterial highways and limited as to surface area beyond that point. It is reasonable to conclude, therefore, that the New York State DOT Commissioner considered the limitation on surface area consistent with the minimum standards of the Act and the agreement. A speech by the Federal Highway Administrator in July 66 clarified this. Sorry, where I lost it. Sorry, that was a trail. That was the end, sorry. Okay. I end with that the DOT Commissioner signed off on the value of the signs. I don't know what happened to the rest of it. Okay. Anybody else?
I fully support your statement, and I think looking at the Federal Highway Act regulations and the controls that were imposed in the agreement between the New York State and Federal clearly seems to indicate that there were limitations. And the limitation being the distance from the highway would be one of the factors. And I still don't see how this particular case, Bartow 2, same as Bartow 1, differs from that. And to me, it seems like a violation of that surface area measure.
Anybody else?
I agree also. I feel that a sign is the pictorial representation and not the structure. And whether it's a monopole or a duopole or a tripole, to me is irrelevant. The sign is the representation, and you go to the extreme limits of that pictorial representation. And I'm very happy to hear you say that you feel that the 13th Street sign could be read as one sign, because I did look at that again and I felt that way. But this is not about how DOB has enforced things, this is about how we interpret the zoning.
Correct. Anything else anybody wants to add? Okay.
Item number 10, 2016-4332A, 4 Williams Court, Queens.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry, this is 4 Williams Court?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. They submitted as requested a restrictive declaration requiring the owner to maintain the roadway frontage consistent with DOT standards, where New York City doesn't take care of it, and also that the owner will comply with the parking regulations and will enforce that. We still need fire department and DOT sign off. We did just get, council just got from the Borough President's office, the Corp Council opinion on both of those William Courts, the skinny one and the skinnier one, because it's an L shape, both called Williams Court. So those are considered public ways, even though they're not, neither of them are map streets. They also sent more title company, the applicant also sent us more title company reports about the rights of way, but they sort of left for us to do the meets and bounds mapping, and I don't think that's our job, though that takes a lot of time, and that's for applicant counsel to do, to map the meets and bounds on the easements and so on a map, so that we can see and we can follow along. And with Lot 11, so I see that it's considered a public way by the Corp Council. We had the question about how's that work, because it's a privately owned piece of property, Lot 11. I'm not really sure how that works, but once the city declares we get to use it, I'm not really sure how that functions. We did reach out to the Borough President's office, and do they have any other opinions, or they just...
No, they just provided the map and the...
Okay, so, yeah, maybe in the meantime, we can have a quick conversation with their land use council and find out if there's anything else they want to do about this, because Queens is also now paying very close attention to their rather wacky street conditions, the way Staten Island is. So we should give them a chance to weigh in on that. And also, fire, I just would like to hear from fire department about how it maneuvers on that street. So is it now assuming that it can go all the way around because it's a city recognized public way? Because at one point I thought he was going to have to make a U-turn, which is impossible. So, okay. Anybody else on that?
Zoning calendar, continued hearing items. Item number 11, 22614BZ, 1470276 Road, Queens.
Because I wanted an adjournment on this.
Item number 12, 26314BZ, 1601 Oriental Boulevard, Brooklyn.
Also to adjourn.
Item number 13, 314BZ, 1746 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
It's 330-14.
What did I
right?
say?
I think he said 300, but okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
330-14.
14BZ, I'm sorry, 1746 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
Right. I still didn't find proof of notice to the neighbors on this.
I'll look.
Yeah. And I'm still concerned about the extent of the removal of existing material. Maybe the architect could come and explain to us how this is going to happen. The sections show all of the first floor joists are going to be removed and replaced at a lower level. And they're also removing the entire front and one side wall at the first floor and a portion of the other side wall at the second floor. It just sounds like a house of cards, kind of. And I'd like to know, really, in terms of how it's laying out, what the reason for the removal of the south side wall is on the first floor, other than the bay window, which I understand you might want to change the design concept, but why do you have to remove that whole south side since, at the first floor, since it's not sitting on the same plates? And also, because initially, it was cut out a little bit because they were going to have parking on that side, but now they don't have parking on that side. So I think that's just a remnant of the other design. And removal of the first floor, yeah, okay, so also, so they did move the parking to take advantage of the shared driveway and pulled back the second floor by 3 feet, even though the adjacent properties have complying rear yards. And really, there was no argument made to support the extent of this second floor incursion of the rear yard. They just said it, that they're pulling it back by 3 foot. I do understand that the attic roof slopes back away from the rear yard, but I still see opportunities at the interior to reduce the massing at the rear. Our comments at the last hearing were that the house should be more responsive to context, and I don't see that they actually made much of an effort in that regard. Anybody else?
I think the maneuverability of that parking space in the
Yeah.
back is extremely difficult due to the adjacent garage and the porch on the proposed, on the site. I really don't think they have enough space to back up and get out of there. We still don't have the community board approval. I was looking at the attic floor area, they have to count.
wait.
There's community board approval.
I have it noted as it was approved
Okay.
I do too.
All right,
from the first submission, so it must have just gotten buried in the,
okay.
okay.
Regarding the attic floor area, they have to count everything above 5 feet, but they don't give you any dimensions, and it appeared to me that it's potentially undercounted. They didn't tell us if, in terms of the FAR, if there are any homes in the R32, not the R7, that have any special permits in this area. And then that's it.
Just going back to the question of the maneuverability of the car, I looked at it and I think that's the existing way the vehicles are turning. So I just wanted to know what that easement agreement is that allows them to use that shared driveway to park the car.
Well, it's
in the
usually-
back.
Well, they're not parking in the driveway.
No,
Yeah.
they're not, but they're using the shared driveway
Yeah.
to go to the rear and
Sure.
park, which is now much further away than the current parking location, but I just wanted to know.
I mean,
on the
these
deed.
are so common, we see them
Yeah,
all the
okay.
time. They're just right-of-ways, and they don't allow any
Okay.
construction in the easement area, right? Because these are not light and air easements, they're right-of-way easements, as far as I remember. But,
That's fine. then.
yeah. But, yeah, so that's the thing, maybe they need to show us that they're not going to clip off the corner of the house. That's what it really looks like.
But it just looks very tight,
Yeah.
you know?
Right, it's making that curve around the rear is going to be very tight, especially
Yeah.
since they're going to be backing out doing
Right.
it. It's not like they could turn around and at least see where they're going.
And it's like
Yeah.
you can't like maneuver to the left because the porch is there, and it's very difficult. I don't think I could do it.
Right. Okay.
Item number 14, 4-15BZ, 119 Webster Avenue, Brooklyn.
They requested an adjournment.
Item number 15, 258-15BZ, 2619 East 16th Street, Brooklyn.
The parking study was revised and is now based on gross square footage as we requested, or as is actually required. I'm still having issues with the idea, though, about this whole thing where you do an environmental review before the BSA, it determines there's a demand, and then you go to DOB and you waive it. I just don't get that. It's like it thwarts the entire environmental review process. It also thwarts the whole purpose of the special permit. It'd be different if we found there was no demand. right?
Well, or that the existing demand is the same as, or what's the difference between the existing demand and the anticipated demand? Like, are
Right.
they going to increase staff? Are they going to have new visitors? Is it just the same people coming to the doctor's office and working in the office that will be working in the new building? And I don't think that was really clear
No.
to me.
That was not clarified.
Because then I was thinking that the existing staff and patients are really counted
Relocating.
in the parking availability study. They were already on the street parking. So then, would there, what do they anticipate being the increase in demand?
Right.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was clarified, if there will be
It wasn't.
increase in the number of employee. They've indicated the number of visitors will be the same, the patient count will be the same. It's just lack of space that's forcing them to find a secondary location. But so I think that affects the parking count,
Yeah.
and that to me was not clear.
They treated this like a different facility, just relying on the numbers from the nearby facility, saying, okay, we interviewed those guys, this is what our kind of patient and staff type does, so it implied that they're going to duplicate everything and expand the patient load, which wasn't actually what the testimony was. No. I don't think.
Right, it was
Yeah.
like they used to go to Kings Highway, now instead for tests, they go to see the doctor and they're just going to walk 2 blocks.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so this is more like the delta study between what's currently at the other site and increases, they obviously have to increase staff somewhat, because you have to duplicate staff when you have different locations.
right.
But maybe patients,
And then the medical billing is supposedly what's going on currently in the building that's going to be demolished. So are they going to increase that staff?
right,
So, yeah, it wasn't really clear.
right, okay. And also, we also talked about at the last hearing that the parking availability study was conducted on a Tuesday when there are no alternate side parking regulations. And there's like a lot of internal inconsistency in the study, so it looks like the maps at least exclude those areas that are no parking Thursday, Friday, even though it's a Tuesday study. But then on the parking utilization chart, the chart shows the number of cars parked in available spaces at a given hour of study, rather than the number of empty spaces versus number of available spaces. So you actually can't correlate the chart to the maps. Like, the numbers just don't match. So the chart generalizes the number of legal spaces as though they are the same all day long, which isn't the case. So the maps show that between 8 and 9, there's alternate side, and then between 10 and 11, there isn't, but the chart doesn't do that. So it just takes an overall, like, brute number for legal spaces and doesn't adjust for times of day of no parking zones, or also times of week for no parking zones. So I absolutely could not figure out how they came to the conclusion. Capacity also at the adjacent parking lot, so there's a public parking lot right next door, so that sounds great, there's a public parking lot, but it's described as 18 spaces at peak hour of 3 to 4, but the demand actually holds fairly constant all day from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And the availability in that same lot drops down at 10 a.m. to 13 spaces, and at 11 a.m. to 7 spaces, and at noon to 10 spaces. So you can't really say there are 18 spaces, that sometimes there's only 7, and it could be worse, right? So I don't see how you can rely on the public parking lot to compensate for demand. And I also wonder, as we asked at the last, why hasn't the applicant looked at securing parking off-site? That's provided that the calculations on this study still have a demand of 13, because again, it didn't seem to be targeted enough to the specific business here. And then one patient in the survey, who, they asked if you drove, where did you park? The patient said, very far away, the parking is horrendous. So you're doing a survey, it's telling you something. So, anybody else on that? Any more stuff?
No, just on the parking, I'll go back and look at it, but I was looking at the on-street parking availability map and the chart, and I thought the numbers were consistent, but then,
The numbers are consistent in the sense that if it says 4/0, they use the 4 because that's how many spaces there are on the street, legal spaces. But then, the way they run it down through the hours, they don't take into account that the number of legal spaces actually changed between 8 AM and 11 AM because now there are, I have it here, now there's parking availability on the street that there wasn't before, or there isn't, and they don't adjust the legal space count because it's just this total of 186 legal spaces or
I thought it
whatever.
was taken out of the availability on the
Yeah,
other
I
side.
thought so, too.
So I thought the legal stayed the same, and they didn't adjust it for the no parking 8 to 9, but the amount available would be 0, accounting for the fact that you couldn't park there from 8 to 9. That's how I thought they did it.
yeah.
But I'll look at it again
Yeah,
as well.
I didn't, I saw where they took the number from, but then I didn't see how they concluded that they have all this availability. I mean, we never see on those maps a little tabulation on the map itself, that at the hours between 8 and 9, there are this many spaces available, so that you can easily carry that forward to a chart, and they don't really know, and so when they're trying to go by percentages instead, why use percentages when you have actual numbers? So, yeah.
I had a question about the parking demand survey. I didn't see the staff survey report. Are they? Staff.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Yeah.
They say they have 134 patients and 60 staff trips per day in the narrative. And then when you go to Exhibit C and D, which details out the parking demand, it's labeled as 134 staff and patient, which I thought is like 60 trips too little. And then it seemed that they were using the same modal split for the staff that they were using for the patients, which I thought would be different.
And they changed the modal split, right?
They did?
I thought
for the
they
staff?
changed it, yeah, they
Well,
used a
in
different
Exhibit C and
split.
D,
Maybe not in C and D, but they changed how they were looking at the modal split, no? Or maybe I'm confusing with another one. No, maybe. I'm confusing with another.
well, I just don't know where those 60 staff
Yeah.
trips went. So, and if they have this survey.
Yeah, they did. They said
I
the
thought they
person
broke it
trip
out.
rates, they did change the modal split. It says person trip rates based on the partner medical office found to be 29 visitors per 1,000 GSF and 13
For staff.
for staff. Whether they ran it in C and G,
C and D.
C and D, I don't know. Ready? Okay.
I have a question not related to parking, but just, I want to make sure that they have verified, the applicant has verified with DOB if one means of stair exit meets the building code regulation. The proposed plan shows one set of staircase on
Right.
for a 5-story new construction.
I think, yes, and so there is a rule that you can have scissor stairs for some occupancy groups if the floor plate is under a certain size.
But this is not a scissor stair.
Yeah,
It's just
oh, it's,
one.
no, but if it's one staircase, but this is an existing building, right? So.
No, it's going to be.
No,
Oh, it's a new
building.
construction, sorry, new construction, right. But it cannot, so this is a very small site, so they could
Yeah, I
have
just-
one stair, but it has to be a scissor stair. Because I don't think you can have only one means of egress.
I also felt that they should add a note to the plans, just saying that DOB will review for Appendix G compliance and dry flood proofing. Because they give us details, but we're not looking at that.
Right.
So that's for DOB to look at.
Okay.
I also just want to say before, I always felt like you do about coming here for the parking reduction and then taking that and going to DOB for the waiver, because it's double dipping.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you get around that other than maybe tightening up the
condition.
policy
Yeah.
somehow, because it does seem like you are, it seems to me DOB's waiver is because demand is so light when you only require like 14 spaces or 15 spaces, that, okay, we'll do away with it. But when you see that they come here and get that reduction from a high number down to something that's just under the waiver and then going to DOB, it just seems like you're grabbing 2 bites of the apple.
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that the parking demand is so light, so to speak. So I always was troubled by that, but,
Yes.
I guess it's like a loophole in the policy. that
No, but I
allows
don't know
them to
why,
go
we do an
places.
environmental review. I don't know that you are allowed to do a loophole. There's an environmental review based on.
I mean,
right?
I would caution using the word, the environmental review for this, because reduction in parking, it doesn't trip a threshold for
No.
an environmental review. The parking studies that we've been asking for, we're doing for the findings.
Right.
For 7303 and
Okay.
such as that. We can, as a condition, I think it says that we can impose whatever conditions we need to. We can say that you have to provide the parking that would be demanded for this. Because what we're actually, the special permit allows them to do is just use a different ratio for determining what their parking
Right.
requirement is. And so, yes, they still are eligible for the as of right DOB waiver, but they can come here and we can say, no, you guys have a parking demand of 14 spaces, 10 spaces, whatever it is, and we could say that you need to figure out how you're going to accommodate that.
I mean, only because if we're ultimately settling that, okay, the demand at peak time is like 13 spaces, we know it to be 13 spaces or even more.
Right, right.
Whereas to me, the as of right DOB intent is that if you say it's 15 spaces, it's probably less. And so, I find that there's a problem there.
Yes,
That, then we are dumping all of these spaces out onto the street.
Right, right.
That we
Yeah.
know definitely are going to be taken.
Because we do have cases where there is no demand, or it's a demand of 2. So then if
Yeah.
it gets waived,
Right.
it's a demand of 2, right? But, and sometimes where there's a demand of 0, and they establish that. So then we're requiring, because we're limited by the math, we still have this number that shows up that's under, say, the 15 waiver, then it's fine that they go and they waive. So, no, I find this, yeah. Okay, so we'll find out more, because I still don't think the study is getting at the heart of the question. Right? Okay.
Item number 16, 2016-4229BZ, 1452 Drumgooley Road, West Staten Island.
Okay.
Drumgooley
Okay.
Road. Sorry, excuse me, Miss Staten.
Sounds like Harry Potter where they live. In response to our comments, the applicant provided information about the owners of the similarly shaped adjacent lots, finding that they're all held in common ownership, and really common ownership. That's pretty impressive on the part of that one property owner. The applicant also looked at the as-of-right development potential of the 2 subject lots as if they had not been merged and continued to be eligible for the Section 23-52 shallow lot rear yard waiver. The study revealed that only 2 really undersized substandard houses, especially one of them is very undersized, could have been built on each lot, demonstrating that the hardship complained of was not created by the merger, zoning lot merger in 2015. I don't have any notes that that the other commissioners or anyone had issues with the building massing and the parking location? No? Okay. And the only waiver actually being sought here is for a rear yard reduction to 13 foot 2 inches, which actually would have been permitted as of right had the merger not occurred in 2015.
I definitely think this minimum variance as proposed is reasonable, as it is also feasible, especially in the context, and looking at the as-of-right proposal, the one with the front yard variance, it would have placed the houses much closer to the Drumgo, which is a service road. It's a busy road with 2 curb cuts, not 1 curb cut. It would have also eliminated more street trees than what's being, so I think those, just from a planning perspective, this is a reasonable one, and as plans have indicated, that 540 square foot house is just not feasible, and we have looked at buildings that have been a little bit more, and we have granted variances on them.
Right. Anybody else? Oh, okay.
Item number 17, 2016-4266BZ, 330 East 59th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we requested at the last hearing that the applicant provide proof that the tenants were notified of the hearing. I didn't see that this was provided. Maybe there was notice generally, but it didn't look like the tenants. It looked like, notice to neighbors as is generally required, but in this case, because it's a gym, and in particular, the type of gym, we want the neighbors notified. So also, we still need Department of Investigation, not sure what's holding that up. And the fire department asked at the last hearing to verify that the sprinklers and smoke detectors were realigned to accommodate the wall changes. So we need to know whether that was done. They did add to the plans acoustical information for wrapping the columns against which the medicine balls are bounced, if you can actually bounce a medicine ball. They say the medication was installed and tested on April 5th, but I couldn't tell how it was tested. It sounded more like they stood there and they didn't feel themselves any vibration, not that they used any kind of monitoring equipment. So I'd like to understand that. The applicant should also verify that all of the acoustical measures that were recommended by Criterion in their September 28, 16 report were actually installed. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it might be a good idea to add the criteria recommendations either to the resolution or to the plan.
Okay,
There's
yeah,
5 conditions.
both. It should go on the plans, for sure. Plans. Okay.
Item number 18, 2016-4277BZ, 79-04, 151st Avenue, Queens.
They requested an adjournment.
But they did make a statement.
They did make a statement, yes, but that they're that they're working on things that they're going to propose. Fencing, that they can't figure out how to do something that covers the storage facility,
I know it's not really-
planting.
I guess they're going to comply with most of the things, like
Yeah.
increasing the landscaping.
Right.
Making things denser, replacing the fencing,
Given
adding the
this-
wall over to the other side of the driveway, putting in street trees, and then they just said that they don't think that they could put a cover,
Right.
which seemed reasonable.
Right, and given the significance of this and the need for it, and especially it needs to be in place as quickly as possible, we need to be mindful of that, and I think the proposals.
Well, there's
that-
also the possibility that they may have to change units out, so you would have to like bring in a cherry
Right, so I
picker
think
and
what they
probably
have,
load it.
what they have been considerate of our recommendations, and I feel that they've been quite responsive. and
Right,
I would like
right.
to see the next plans, that's how, and
Yeah.
hopefully we can.
Well, I think that the things that we're suggesting don't actually slow up the installation of the battery. It's really the decorations around the battery, right? It's how you handle the wall, how you handle a fence, how you plant some plants. The batteries go in independent of the dolling up of the site. And I was curious because I'd seen online other battery storage where there were covers on them, so I was just curious, they did it in Sweden, why can't we? But we're sometimes unfortunately not like Sweden. Okay.
New cases, zoning calendar, item number 1, 20-15BZ, 461 Avenue X, Brooklyn.
The community board was actually split on this decision, although it approved with 16 in favor, 12 were opposed. I'd like a clarification. Is the current congregation of 300 operating out of the 1,300 square foot trailers at 522 Avenue X, for which the Buildings Department website indicates there are no building permits, public assembly permits, or other authorizations, making it a dangerous, illegal use that fire department needs to comment on or do something about?
Wait, go ahead.
They didn't?
I believe that they did not properly notice this
Are you serious?
again.
What?
Yes.
Public hearing was not.
And so the public hearing was not properly noticed.
But we postponed it already.
We've already done this, yes, and we.
What did they do this time?
Nothing.
They did nothing? Wait a minute. Sure. I thought,
Yeah,
no, wait a
yeah,
second,
yes.
wait.
I thought he submitted a whole bunch of,
I got some stuff too. Wait a second. Hold on. 2018.
But he resubmitted.
He did submit something.
My understanding was it submitted for the not for the public hearing.
Proof of service. Wait, affirmation of service to the, so you're talking about to the neighbors, right? Right?
Yeah, the hearing.
So this one is on February, this is the affidavit of mailing in 2015.
We can give comment at the review session, but we should be aware that they did not do
the
that.
neighbors have not been notified.
Yeah, the neighbors not been
Again?
notified.
Wow.
So here's a question.
What's
We've done this before.
Sorry, just a second.
Yeah,
What?
I mean,
What's
Just wondering if the
the,
neighbors don't know to listen, what's the utility
Sure.
Yeah.
of giving comments?
I mean, all, except, didn't we give comments the last time?
on another project, we. did
No, on
give
this one.
Review session comments.
No, on this one,
Did
we
do it
gave
did we
comments
do
on
it
March
this one as well? I
28th.
just remember.
Oh, I don't
on,
know. I don't have any notes.
Right, I didn't know that.
Um,
I thought we just postponed it on March 28th. We didn't talk about it.
Comments.
Because I
Yeah.
hadn't
we
even
didn't
read
read
it.
that?
Right, we were
Point.
told, don't even read it
Yes,
on March.
yeah,
on
that-
March
that one
28th.
we-
Okay. So,
got to everyone ahead
given
of
that
time.
there's a lot of opposition to this, I agree that if the community doesn't hear our comments, that's kind of not right. It
Right.
deprives them of an
That's fine.
opportunity to respond to our comments.
Right.
Because they're not going to know to listen to the review session of whichever. Okay. Wow. All right.
Right.
So I just have a question, since it's going to get adjourned and that there's still the outstanding issue of the current congregants that are using a facility, we do not
Yes.
know whether it has a permit. Does it make sense for us to reach out to
Fire department.
fire department?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. It doesn't have permits. It's not a secret. It has nothing. It doesn't exist. It's a vacant lot. That's what the DOB thinks it is, right? So, okay. All right. That's ridiculous. Okay.
Go to the next one.
Yeah.
Item number 2, 2016-4176BZ, 7804 31st Avenue, Queens.
Okay. The Community Board 3 voted to recommend approval. Councilmember Drum submitted a letter in support. We have 7 letters of opposition, mostly citing potential impacts on traffic, noise, and pedestrian circulation. 1 on the height of the building, and 1 letter in support. I note that no parking waiver is being sought here because the as-of-right parking requirement is under the as-of-right waiver maximum and considers only the largest of the assembly areas, which is kind of interesting in the context of many of these kinds of buildings that we've looked at, because a lot of the times it's simultaneous occupancy as it is here. So that's the strict reading of the zoning resolution, but we do need to look at parking from a findings perspective, I think. I'd like them to clarify the hours of prayer in the statement of facts, as there are two sets of times in the same paragraph. I understand that the times change according to the seasons, so that could maybe be clarified like that. There's an interesting program. I think that this is an interesting program in that the prayer halls are located on 3 separate floors. I'd like to just understand how that actually works. I've never seen that before. Do they use loudspeaker
I think that's
systems?
loudspeakers.
Yeah. Is it televised? Like, that's interesting. I've never seen that. They should show in section and elevation that the building mass fits within the height and setback and sky exposure plane. They didn't provide those little dash lines. They need to indicate on the drawings that the rear yard, indicate on the drawings what the rear yard requirements are. Even though this is a corner lot, you have to mention it. They need to show more information about how the side elevations will be treated and what the proposed exterior finish material is. I think it would have been helpful also to show on a map the dimensions of the yards in the neighboring yards. But this proposal has a 5-foot front yard on 78th Street and a 10-foot front yard on 31st Avenue. The radius map shows very shallow yards, though they're not dimensioned, at the corner lots on 78th Street and a few shallow yards on 31st Avenue, but none of those are dimensioned, so that's something that really should be provided. With respect to the parking concerns of the neighbors, according to the statement of facts, up to 200 persons will be attending the services or other events at one time. I'd like the applicant to, and actually, it really should be somebody from the mosque who speaks, because they're the most knowledgeable about the activities of their congregation, especially because there's an ongoing house of worship on the site, right? I'd like to know how the mosque will handle these parking loads. They should also provide a map showing the proximity of congregants to the site, because we've learned that a lot of people are expected to walk to services. So maybe that goes to the parking issue. Also, they need to provide landscaping and fencing and information on how pedestrian impacts and noise will be addressed. Usually, but I don't think the window openings are that large, but usually we require a high STC rating on the windows that are on the property lines. So, anybody else?
I had some questions with regards to the layout. For example, and this goes back to if there's a possibility of making the yards a little bit wider. The minimum dimensions of a typical ADA elevator is 80-inch by 54-inch, and the proposed one, as shown on the drawings, is much bigger. So what I would like to...
I just want to say, in 2014, the building code was revised and the elevators got bigger.
Okay.
So I don't know if what the information that you have is right. Now they have to fit
The
stretchers.
stretcher, yeah.
Yeah,
This was
they've
based on the
gotten,
latest, but anyway, if they could just
Yeah,
clarify
okay.
what they're proposing, in that case, my question is, what they're proposing, is that the required minimum? Or, and if it is not, and it's bigger than that, is it necessary programmatically? Then also the program, while they have outlined the various ceremonial programs that are occurring, there are 3 office spaces on each floor, and that's not clearly weaved into the programmatic need aspect of it, again questioning why there's a need for 3 office spaces on each floor. And also there's quite a bit of lobby area and elevator staircases, and if there's a way to realign them, create more like scissor staircases, things like that, that can...
they're not allowed.
They're not allowed
No.
to? Okay.
Place of assembly.
Place of assembly. Okay.
Not allowed.
It's just that some of the configuration, I felt like if they could be tightened up, maybe the building footprint can be set back a little bit further, especially from the 78th Street side, that being a narrow narrow street.
But having the architect at the
Yeah.
hearing to
Yeah.
discuss sort of
Yes,
how
we need that, right.
Like,
But-
hear these concerns
Yeah.
and
I mean, this is
respond.
without
yeah.
taking away from the
Yeah,
prayer
yeah.
area, it's just some of the
Understood.
common areas, if those could be tightened to allow for a little bit more.
But I do want to point out that this is a very small site, and that they're providing setbacks that we rarely see on these houses of worship. Most of the time, we don't see any, right?
It's usually
They build
full lot coverage.
full lot coverage, and this one's providing yards all the way around, so and one of the reasons they're able to do it, because we don't see that in the other applications, is they're putting the prayer spaces on 3 levels. And in other applications, on 4 levels, yeah, okay, 3 levels for the men, though. So normally they would all be in the same room. And so we would see that in other applications, that everyone's on the same, all the men are on the same floor and all the women are on the same floor, not spread over. So it seems like the design is really going out of its way to accommodate a small building, reduced even more than we often see on a small lot. So it's kind of, I feel like they've tucked it as much as is reasonable to tuck compared to the others, and that's what I'm looking, and especially compared to the one that we were going to hear right before this.
I had a couple,
Yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I wanted to say I was sympathetic to this case. I really didn't think it was a very big ask, but still, there was some information to me that was kind of missing, like the total height, including the spire or minaret, I'm not quite sure what you call it, and then a discussion of that in the character finding instead of just the height above DFE of the main portion of the building. So that this way we could see, I guess, how it fits in the context of the other religious institutions and their, spires as well. And they talk about the congregation being over 200 members, but they don't talk about growth. So they don't talk about past growth that leads them up to the 200-plus members or future growth, so that we could see whether or not they're going to outgrow this space quickly or not.
Right.
When they talk in the statement about the as of right and the lesser variance and the amount of people per floor that can be accommodated, they really should talk about it in context of having a full build-out cellar, since the cellar is 100% below grade, and in all scenarios could have the 99 people.
Yeah.
And they could flip it so that those 99 people are men. Not that I'm saying
Right.
that they should consider doing that, or that a lesser variance or a minimal variance or an as of right would be feasible for this religious institution, but I still think they need to pay lip service to the argument
Yeah.
and just fully flesh it out.
Oh, the cellar is full built-out to the property line.
For the proposed.
Only in the proposed,
only
but not
proposed,
the
but not-
minimal
Oh, the as of
or
right,
the as
okay.
of right.
And it should be consistent for
Yeah.
both as
I had
of right
a
and
question
lesser
about
variance.
that because I don't know how they're gonna, the cellar beams come right up to grade, so they should explain how they're gonna put in plantings.
Oh, good point.
Good
Yeah.
point.
And do women worship at tables and chairs, or do they use the
I think
floor
that layout
mats?
was done more for if they have like.
Multi-purpose.
Multi-purpose, that was a multi-purpose layout, not for the praying.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a very malleable site, space, because you just take the tables away and then you've got a prayer space.
Question is
then
just
I
where
know-
are they storing them? I don't think in the
That's true.
plan there is any storage area for that.
The other thing is, I know we had another mosque where, instead of the 15 square feet per person, I believe it was about 7
Yeah.
or less. So how are they, justifying, or where do they?
How do they
get the
calculate the
15
occupancy?
square, that seems pretty high. So it could
Well-
be more than the 95 people in one room.
Right.
And then they wouldn't have a
But
parking
so
waiver.
each of these different institutions that come here, each of them uses their own idea of how they're going to seat or whatever their worshipers, right? So when they give us a statement that they're going to have 196 people on a floor, they're doing it based on their idea of how fixed seating will work, or how many tables they have, or whatever. So if And sometimes in the designs of mosques, the carpeting determines what the spacing is, because the carpeting is woven even with spacing. So you can't necessarily use one group's vision on occupancy, right? Because they may manage their institution differently than the last guy or the
And
next
some of
guy.
them have their own cultural variations, which
Right.
vary from one mosque community to the others.
Right.
Although parking is calculated for the largest.
It's rated occupancy.
It's rated occupancy
No,
for the
but-
largest space.
Yes,
So,
yes,
so
but-
it's not sensitive to how they.
No, that's not correct. So no, sorry. I'm going to clarify how it's done.
I've done many
No,
of
no,
these,
so-
Madam Chair.
Excuse me, I'm going to tell you how it's actually done. The rated occupancy is if you don't know the actual occupancy, then you go to the Department of Buildings and you say, I am going to only get a PA for this many occupants, and that's what DOB uses. It's not the rated, it's the same with the schools. The schools have a rated occupancy in the classrooms of 60 kids.
Right.
But you're not allowed to have 60 kids because you're only allowed to have 33 or 23 or whatever your school says. So
Right.
so the architect shows 23 students in there, and that's what DOB accepts as the actual load on the staircases. If you look in the building code, it actually gives you those two options.
I would be
Okay.
cautious with that on the rated capacity, because I've seen several houses of worship where DOB has pushed back and said, no, you could fit more people in here.
Well, that may be because DOB is saying we don't agree
Yeah,
with
yeah.
DOB
So they
has
have
to
to-
agree with what the
Yeah, they have to agree with
architect
it.
suggests.
Yeah, and I think so we should, I mean, if they're representing that they have a maximum occupancy and want us to waive a certain number of parking spaces, that's fine, they may very well be fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
But they need to make sure that they have a accepted argument
There you go.
at DOB.
There you go.
And then I was wondering if they anticipate using the roof in any way, because they have these nice, it looks like clear railings, and I guess that would be another issue in terms of potential noise issues for the neighborhood, because they also have two sets of egress stairs going to the roof.
Right. Okay.
And just to clarify that for ADA access, the women can enter the front door and use the elevator.
Yes. Right.
Otherwise, I guess they go in the back door and just go down the stairs.
Right, to the separate, yeah. Which we saw also on the other mosque, where they actually had to go through, it was even like an administrative office from the elevator, yeah. Okay.
Item number 3, 2016-4242BZ, 1671 East 29th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, the community voted 32 in favor and 5 against. We have one letter of objection from a neighbor, which is quite cryptic, that states that their concerns have not been addressed. So I assume that the neighbor will be here to express the concerns. With respect to the existing width of the side yards, they provided a survey, a statement of facts, a zoning calculation sheets, and every one of them has a different side yard width. The survey doesn't support the 4 feet or 9 foot side yards. It says 3.9 and 8.9. And there's also, on the zoning page, they say 3'8" and 7'8". So somebody's right, but not everybody. Although waivers are sought for floor area, side yards, rear yard, lot coverage, and open space, this is a 683 square foot, 1-story rear yard addition that reduces the rear yard to 20 feet but leaves the upper portion of the house intact. I note, though, that the chimney extends beyond the 20-foot minimum rear yard depth, and need them to investigate and then add a note on the drawing if it's true that a chimney is a permitted obstruction in a rear yard, because I don't know if it is. We did have this on something else, and
Yeah.
I don't think
I
it.
think it was permitted obstruction.
Yeah, so it needs to be noted on the drawings and cited, because we're not granting an additional obstruction if it's not permitted. The site is adjacent to a corner house with a garage at the rear, and although the house to the other side and the building to the rear have complying rear yards without garages, there are one-story garages that are otherwise extremely typical of the block, just 2 houses away, and it's also typical of the entire area. So I thought the addition is really modest compared to what we see most of the time, and will not alter the essential character, though I don't know what the concern of the neighbor is whose demands have not been met. The requested increase in floor area to .64 FAR is within the range of what is shown in the 400-foot study area, with over 15 houses in the .6 and up range, and ditto for lot coverage, with the proposed 40% very typical of the block. Anybody else?
No, I agree, this was very modest.
What?
Item number 4, 2016-4251BZ, 626 Sheepshead Bay Road, Brooklyn.
Okay, we gave our, this one was postponed also about notice. Are we good on notice?
We're good on notice.
Okay. We gave,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
we gave our comments at the last review session. Although the hearing was postponed for lack of notice, I think we should repeat our questions for any public who may be in attendance today. I don't know if anyone is. But also note that the applicant made a submission subsequent to that last review session in response to our comments at that last review session. I had said I thought it was a very thorough and thoughtful application with most questions answered. The study showed that the proposed 132-space garage will provide more parking spaces than the peak demand of 109 spaces. And I'm going to go in sort of, and then there were some questions asked, which they answered. So then I'm going to kind of combine their submission with questions from last week. So we had asked, what is the proposed not-for-profit use? And they responded with what I think we already knew, which was use group 4A, philanthropic without sleeping, so we didn't find out anything more about that. And the reason we wanted to know was we wanted to understand how rated capacity was calculated to arrive at 18 spaces for 36,000 square feet, which is 1 per 20 persons. So it's a very low occupancy rate. Commissioner Montanez was concerned about the not-for-profit uses and intensity of parking and wondered whether there was room for stackers. The floor-to-ceiling height is 13 feet, and we learned that that's enough for stackers. They did use a Coney Island EIS for retail, but they didn't have a modal split. And there was additional data for medical and not-for-profit in that EIS. And so there was a revised EAS, and I see the central office function in the use group 4 was increased to 25,000. But a not-for-profit, I know, can be a social service provider where the entire operation is effectively an office. So, I actually don't know what people think not-for-profits do. Most of the time, they're office workers, and they're doing what not-for-profits do, unless it's a museum or something like that. So they have the same kinds of needs as office workers. Central office is like bookkeeping. It's not, but if you're counseling service, then you're getting patients in, basically, right? So also, another question we had last week was, is the parking on the adjacent building on the rooftop required to have a BSA permit? They said no, that the special permit is in the Ocean Parkway District and pursuant to Section 36-11 in CA2s for a building with parking on the roof of a basement level. You don't need to get a parking permit. The first story here is approximately 3 feet below base flood, and it's the basement.
It's the first time, you're lucky to be in a flood zone.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it almost looks like they're intentionally it does look like they're intentionally putting it 3 feet below. Because they also have to build now a bathtub for all the mechanical stuff that they're keeping down there. That seems extremely expensive. And then Commissioner Shanda asked that they provide a more recent photo, observing that the building is almost topped out. In fact, the photos show that the steel superstructure is largely in place, including the decking. Also, based on my notes, the floor areas have changed in the statement of facts. I won't go into what they are, but they did go up and down in different places, so they're all different. Where the total is 109,376, and it was 108,080 square feet. And then, just a last comment, I'm still really not understanding, and I wish somebody would explain, how this is considered 2 buildings on separate zoning lots when Lot 1 shares building systems and a loading dock with the subject lot. And the only way to access the parking on the roof is via the ramp on the subject building, and also the second floor of the subject building shows no firewall between them. I thought that's another thing, that a building has to have a firewall. And also, if the ground floor is the basement in both buildings, since both are below base flood, then the parking floor is the first floor, not the second floor, and so on. So it's mislabeled. They sort of skipped the first floor in this, or, I don't know.
It's number 13, it's an 8-woman.
Right. But even 3. Anybody?
I had a question, that is, going back to, even though Lot 1 is not before the BSA, I just want to make sure that the proposed action will not compromise the compliancy of the parking requirement for Lot 1.
They're going to get it waived.
They said they're under the requirements.
They have 16 spaces and
Yeah.
they're going to go get it waived.
Okay.
Yeah, they said only need 60, and 25 is the waiver there.
But if they were on the same zoning lot,
And they have the capacity, so
yeah, maybe.
that's just a question.
They have 18
Right.
extra spaces, right?
And I think we had also asked about the lighting on the deck. I don't think that has been responded to at this current submission, in this current submission. So just want to know if they're providing any lighting and how that's going to be addressed in terms of the lumen and.
Okay, so the lights spread outside of the property line.
I just had a question about the use group 4A nonprofit. If you read the zoning resolution, the limit is 25,000 square feet for 50 people. So are they assuming they're going to have one nonprofit with 50 people? Or are they interpreting it as being 2 nonprofits, each could have 50 people? Or how are they interpreting it? And I know that they're using the higher office parking usage for that, but it still wasn't clear to me. And they made a statement how they can't tell us who the potential tenants are because they're in discussion. So I thought that, why should a better description of the potential tenants, like, is this visiting nurse services or something like that?
Right.
With people coming and going during the day, why is that secret information?
Right. Yeah, well, but they may not actually have a tenant.
Well,
They just intend to rent to a tenant who.
I mean, their good faith reliance was a broker letter saying
Right.
that we're looking for the right tenants,
Yeah.
but,
But isn't that just the finding, that you're pursuing those uses in
Yes.
good faith? And
In
that's
good faith,
what they're
right.
showing.
but I don't understand what type of use is this use group 4A office use?
Right, because if it's, usually we talk about medical office, so that's a known quantity, most of the time that's what they are, right? And this whole thing about limiting to 50 persons, that's only in the central administrative functions. So if there's no limitation on persons if you're a counseling service and, where you're.
Well, the staff could be 50, but they could have many visitors.
No, the staff could be 300 because The 50 is only for central office functions, the bookkeeper, the management group. But the service providers are social workers, for example. They could have 300 social workers, each of whom sits at a cubicle and receives all day clients. So that there is no restriction.
I mean, I
Well, that's
suppose that
the
you.
third interpretation.
Yeah.
I didn't
We
even
had a
think of it
somewhat
as
different
that.
thought
No,
on
no,
this.
that's how-
If you know.
No,
I mean, we-
that's what it is. Central off, I've done a lot of this kinds of issues
Oh.
because a not-for-profit always has to have their bookkeepers, their people who are handle the paperwork, but they're not the ones who put up the shows or the ones who are the actual social workers and all of that. And so,
Well, I think it excludes treatment facilities. It excludes ambulatory care or treatment facility,
right.
like where you
Well,
see a
okay,
lot of
so
patients.
so I'm not saying necessarily patients, but there's lots of other things that are not considered ambulatory care, right? There are lots and lots of kinds of not-for-profits that don't fit within the ambulatory care description. Like, if we talked about the one that we had on Settlement House, that was home health workers, right?
Right.
That's not an ambulatory care service. That's
Right.
people who are going to be sent to somebody's house
Yes.
to stay with them,
And they
right?
come in for assignments or for
Right,
training.
and we saw that layout. It was many, many, many cubicles all squished together, and they are, none of them the bookkeeper. They're all actually working on with client needs. You can talk, there's so many different
See,
things
I
like
never
that.
interpreted it as being only the bookkeeper type people could not exceed 50. I thought it was everyone
No.
in the central office can't exceed 50.
No, because that's central. So they don't want a not-for-profit to use it as if it's an office,
This is, okay.
right?
It's to limit administrative staff.
Yes, that's what I.
So that you're not having this be your administrative thing. That does, okay.
That's what it is.
That's
It's because
fine.
you should be
Yes.
in a use group 6 office in that.
Right.
And
Got
this,
it.
I don't know, they could get a parking waiver for use group 6 office too, so maybe they shouldn't be torturing it like this and do the analysis based on an office. But then
they're
it's
not
gonna
allowed the
come,
floor
then
area.
it's gonna be an additional,
They're allowed the community facility
Right,
space,
yeah.
but not the office space.
right,
Right, there's a difference in floor area.
yeah. So then, if we really want to be careful about the parking, then we should say you need to, because you don't know the actual use, most of the time we know it's a medical
So
office.
do the worst case.
So do the worst case, yeah, do it as an office.
Well, that's what they did.
Well, they moved as much, more of it over, but
No,
there's
they-
still like 13,000 that's not for profit.
Right.
I just think if they could give us an explanation, a better explanation of who their potential tenants could be, I would be
Yeah.
happy,
Well,
and how they would operate.
but potential tenants versus, like, again, we always do these things where it's office and medical. Those are two known things. We don't know who the doctors are most of the time. We don't know who the offices are, but they're two known things with known calculations,
Right.
right?
Whereas this
And in
one's a little
This one
less.
is so loosey-goosey that it could be anything. And so we could be not taking into account a very heavily visited not-for-profit. I mean, it could be a museum, right? Just to throw out another not-for-profit, there's so many kinds, right? There's so many different things,
Right.
so.
It could also be a not-for-profit that deals with youth,
Right.
teenagers, in which case they're all walking. I mean, it could be one
Yes.
versus,
Right,
yeah, it could swing either way.
Yeah.
Well,
Correct.
that sounds like what the community center use is going to be, because I think according to the traffic, a lot of people walk. But in this
Makes
one,
sense.
30% are driving. So
Right.
it's-
So perhaps, okay, so a more detailed sort of
Well, either,
vision, how's that?
well,
For there.
either that or we use a reasonable worst-case
space.
scenario and we just get over, because we can't
Right.
guess
Yeah,
whether
that's
it's going to be youth who take their bicycles
But
versus.
if it's something that's similar to, to an ambulatory care facility, I mean, the trip generation skyrockets compared to the office.
Right, but it could also just be treated as office, which is the standard. At least we'll have gotten a reasonable worst case, right? As opposed to medical, where they're not planning on doing medical, apparently. Maybe they're, I don't know why not, but Okay?
Ready? Mm-hmm. Item number 5, 2016-4262BZ, 279 Church Street, Manhattan.
Sorry, was ready. Yeah, so we still need the community board recommendation on this. We do have a letter, recent letter from fire department, requiring fire alarm system be installed and inspected before we vote on it. And that's it. Anybody else?
Well, I
Well-
looked online, and this building has a partial vacate order for the second floor and the fifth floor. It's like got all kinds of problems, illegal occupancy, they had a daycare on the second floor, illegal conversion to residential on the fifth floor, occupancy not as per the C of O, elevator and facade violations, something about a corrupt means of egress because the residential and the commercial are sharing an egress.
Yeah.
So,
Now there has to be a fire guard on duty 24/7.
yeah, I mean, when you look on the DOB website, it's like, whoa, it's got 14 ECBs and 19 ECBs and 14 DOB violations.
But this is a little building. I mean, it's not a residential building. It's got a fourth floor with a penthouse where somebody lives. I think that's a thing, that's one family.
Well, the
up
fourth
there.
floor was supposed to be the super's
Well, it's-
place, and then the fifth floor was separate. So now the fifth floor is also residential.
right. But it's not like it's a 12-story building where there's hundreds of people running down the stairs. It really is, it's the yoga studio, and then there's
Right,
the-
but I guess the
people live
standard is the
upstairs.
building code. Is this
Yeah,
permitted?
right. But, so again, we talked about the space itself having what it needs to have, like fire alarms, and having safe means of egress. But on a similar case we talked about last week, where the property owner, let's just say, isn't up to snuff, that we wouldn't take advantage of that against the PCE.
Right, except the second means of egress violation is for the second floor, and this is
Right.
on the second
Right.
floor.
So
I
that-
mean,
no.
only because it
Yeah,
threatens
they have
the
to, they have
occupancy on
to,
the
they
second
have to
floor.
have legal
Yeah.
occupancy.
Yes.
We can be clear on that, I think.
But actually, the third, I don't believe they've opened their second floor.
Well, they do
No,
have a
it's
sign in the second
operating.
floor window. They have a sign in the second floor window, which makes it seem that they
They
are
actually
occupying that
occupying.
second floor.
But it's, because it says that it's well, we should clarify, because they have been operating on the third floor, but maybe they haven't yet opened on the second floor, but let's find out. Because it's described as a legalization of the third floor.
Right.
Right.
Right, and an expansion into the second floor. And then they have like 10 feet of signage, but the signage turns out to be the sign burlesque,
Right.
which has nothing to do with the yoga.
No.
So I was wondering,
Is that left over?
Yeah.
That might have
That's
been the
some power
tenant on the
yoga.
second floor.
no,
it's
in
a
the
hot
past,
yoga
they had
studio.
some violations for erotic massage. That was something else.
Yeah.
This building has a history.
But that's not this user.
No, that's not this user.
establishment.
Yes.
But
Let's-
No,
I was
I
just
think that
wondering
might
why-
have been the second floor user, and that's left over.
That
for
second floor
less.
user was a
Before the
tutoring
daycare.
business and a tutoring business.
You're done. Okay, whatever.
Well, it was just a question of why they want to keep it. Maybe it's landmarked. Who knows?
Which, the sign?
The sign, because they have,
They
well,
do have
actually,
CNE.
they have a CNE, but that's, I think, just for the interior.
It is,
Right.
just for the interior.
So I was wondering about the sign.
Okay. I don't think landmarks actually is allowed to require the retention of signs. Because businesses change. You can't
Yeah,
require
no,
the
they
retention of
can't.
signs. Okay,
Alrighty.
we're punchy.
Is that enough?
This concludes the public review session for May 22nd, 2017.
Oh, my.